It was a warm and sunny Saturday afternoon in Maplewood, a quiet suburban town nestled just outside a bustling city. Families filled the streets with life. Children zoomed by on bicycles, neighbors tended to their lawns, and the smell of barbecues wafted through the air. At the local grocery store parking lot, the Evans family was finishing up their weekly shopping trip. Marcus Evans, a tall, composed man in his early 40s, packed the last of the groceries into the back of the family's SUV. Beside him, his wife Angela helped organize the bags, carefully placing a watermelon next to a stack of cereal boxes. In the back seat of the car, their two children, Jada, 10, and Mason, 7, were busy debating which of them would get the first pick of the snacks once they got home. Marcus appeared every bit the quintessential suburban dad, casually dressed in a polo shirt and jeans, with a steady demeanor and an easy smile. But there was more to him than met the eye. As a senior agent for the FBI, Marcus was a man who had spent his career blending into his surroundings, dismantling criminal organizations, and staying ahead of dangerous adversaries. His ability to remain calm under pressure was legendary among his colleagues, and his family had no idea just how often that skill had kept him alive. Today, however, Marcus wasn't thinking about his work. He was focused on his family, savoring a rare day off. As he closed the trunk and prepared to get into the driver's seat, he noticed a police cruiser slowly pulling into the lot. Two officers stepped out of the car. The first was tall, with a buzz cut and dark sunglasses, exuding an air of arrogance. The second was stockier, with a thick mustache and a no-nonsense scowl. Marcus noticed their eyes scanning the parking lot as they walked, their movements purposeful. His instincts, honed from years in the field, told him something wasn't right. "Hey you!" the officer with the buzz cut barked, pointing directly at Marcus. Marcus turned to face them, keeping his expression neutral. "Can I help you, officers?" "You match the description of someone we're looking for," the buzz cut officer said, his tone clipped. Angela, still adjusting the grocery bags in the car, froze mid-movement. She turned to Marcus, her voice tinged with concern. "What's going on?" Before Marcus could answer, the mustached officer stepped closer. "We need you to come over here for a second," he said, motioning toward their cruiser. Marcus's brows furrowed slightly, but he remained composed. "I'm here with my family," he replied calmly. "If there's an issue, I'd prefer to discuss it here." Buzzcut's face hardened. "I said step over here," he snapped, his tone sharp enough to draw the attention of a few other shoppers in the parking lot. Marcus raised his hand slightly in a gesture of compliance, though his voice remained steady. "I'm more than willing to cooperate, officers, but I'd like to know what this is about first." Without warning, Buzzcut grabbed Marcus by the arm. The sudden movement made Angela drop the bag she was holding, and she rushed toward them. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising. "That's my husband." "Step back, ma'am," the mustached officer said curtly, moving to block her path. "Step back?" Angela shot back, incredulous. "He hasn't done anything wrong." Inside the car, Jada and Mason watched the scene unfold, their confusion quickly giving way to fear. "Mommy, what's happening?" Mason's small voice trembled as he pressed his face against the window. "Stay calm, Angela," Marcus said, his tone steady as he looked at his wife. Turning back to the officers, he added, "I have my ID in my back pocket. If you'll just check—" "Quiet," Buzzcut interrupted, forcing Marcus to turn and place his hands on the hood of the cruiser. By now, a small crowd had started to gather, some bystanders pulling out their phones to record the scene. Angela, her face flushed with anger, pulled out her own phone and began filming. "This is racial profiling," she said loudly. "You have no reason to treat him like this." "Ma'am, I said step back," the mustached officer barked again. Marcus, still restrained, spoke with measured calm. "Officers, I strongly advise you to check my identification. It will clear this up immediately." But the officers weren't listening. Buzzcut opened the cruiser door and gestured for Marcus to get in. Angela's voice grew louder. "You're making a mistake," she shouted. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The mustached officer sneered. "Lady, if you don't put that phone away, you'll be joining him." The tension was palpable. Jada clutched Mason's hand tightly in the back seat, her wide eyes brimming with tears. Marcus, though outwardly calm, was calculating his next move. Years of training told him to wait. Escalating the situation now could put his family in more danger. But Angela wasn't backing down. "You're not getting away with this," she said through clenched teeth, pointing her phone directly at the officers. As Marcus was shoved into the back seat of the cruiser, he caught Angela's eye. "Stay calm," he mouthed to her, his voice barely audible. Inside the car, Mason started to cry. "Why are they taking Daddy?" he whimpered. The scene was spiraling out of control, and the officers' dismissive arrogance only fanned the flames. Unbeknownst to them, the man they had just placed in their cruiser was far from helpless. Marcus had faced far more dangerous situations than this, and he knew that the moment to reveal his true identity would come soon enough. For now, he would watch, wait, and let them dig themselves deeper. The parking lot buzzed with murmurs from the growing crowd, phones raised as they captured every detail of the unfolding drama. Angela stood her ground, her phone held firmly in front of her, documenting the ordeal as her children sobbed in the back seat. Every fiber of her being burned with indignation. Marcus wasn't just her husband. He was a man of impeccable character, a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others, even those who now humiliated him in front of his family. Angela's mind raced. Her husband's calm demeanor was both a relief and a source of frustration. Why wasn't he doing more to stop this? But she knew Marcus too well. If he was staying silent, he had a plan. Inside the cruiser, Marcus kept his hands resting calmly on his lap as Buzzcut climbed into the driver's seat. Mustache leaned against the door, eyeing Angela with disdain. "You're making a scene, lady," Mustache growled. "If you just cooperate, this will all go smoother." Angela's voice rang out loud and clear. "You think this is about cooperating? My husband hasn't done anything wrong. You're harassing him because he's black." Buzzcut snorted from the driver's seat. "Ma'am, we don't profile. He matches a description. End of story." Angela laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Matches a description? What is that supposed to mean? A black man with a family buying groceries? That's your criminal?" Jada, still clutching Mason in the back seat, whispered, "Mom, I'm scared." Angela turned to her children, her face softening. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's going to be fine." She turned back to the officers, her glare returning. These men are going to realize they've made a mistake. Meanwhile, Marcus observed everything from inside the cruiser. His training as an FBI agent kicked into high gear. He wasn't just sitting there helplessly. He was memorizing badge numbers, noting the demeanor and actions of each officer, and calculating the precise moment to assert his authority. "Let's get moving," Buzzcut said, starting the engine. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Before you drive off, officers, you might want to check my wallet. It's in my back pocket. My ID is inside." Buzzcut glanced at him in the rearview mirror, annoyance flashing across his face. "You'll have your chance to explain everything at the station." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that? Because once you figure out who I am, this situation is going to take a very different turn." The calm confidence in his voice gave Buzzcut pause. He turned to Mustache, who shrugged. "Fine," Buzzcut muttered. He stepped out of the car and yanked open the back door. "Turn around." Marcus complied, his movements smooth and deliberate. Buzzcut fished the wallet from his back pocket and opened it. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then his eyes widened, the color draining from his face. "What the hell?" Buzzcut muttered under his breath. He flipped the ID around, staring at the unmistakable FBI badge. Mustache leaned in to see what had silenced his partner. His mouth fell open. "You've got to be kidding me." Outside the car, Angela noticed the shift in their demeanor. "What's the matter? Figured out who you just assaulted?" Buzzcut stammered for a moment before turning to Marcus. "Why didn't you say anything?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. "I tried. You weren't interested in listening." The weight of their mistake began to sink in, and the officers' confident postures faltered. Mustache took a step back, glancing nervously at the crowd, which had grown larger and louder. Angela crossed her arms, her phone still pointed at them. "Oh, now you want to talk?" Too late for that. Inside the car, Marcus adjusted his seat, his calm demeanor now carrying an edge of authority. "Here's what's going to happen. First, you're going to release me. Then you're going to issue an apology to my family, loud enough for everyone here to hear." Buzzcut hesitated. "Look, this is just a misunderstanding," Marcus interrupted, his voice low but firm. "No, this is a case of excessive force and racial profiling, and you're lucky I'm not calling for backup right now." The officers froze. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "But maybe I should. You've got a crowd here, evidence, witnesses. What do you think your department would say when they find out you assaulted an FBI agent in front of 100 people? Buzzcut swallowed hard, his confidence now completely gone. Look, sir, we can work this out. You'll work it out by letting me out of this car, Marcus said. Reluctantly, Buzzcut opened the door. Marcus stepped out, his tall frame towering over the officers. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder as everyone realized the dynamic had shifted. Angela joined Marcus, her phone still raised. You better make it good, she said to the officers. Apologize now. Mustache looked like he wanted to disappear, but Buzzcut cleared his throat. We apologize, sir. This was a misunderstanding. Marcus's gaze hardened. Apologize to my wife and kids. The officers turned to Angela and the kids. We're sorry for the inconvenience, Mustache muttered. Angela scoffed. Inconvenience? You terrorized my family. Jada stepped out of the car, her small voice cutting through the noise. Why did you hurt my dad? The question hung in the air like a heavy weight. Mustache looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Marcus placed a hand on Jada's shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart. They made a mistake, and they're going to face the consequences. The parking lot had grown eerily silent. Marcus stood with his wife and children by his side, towering over the two officers who now looked more like chastised children than authority figures. The crowd lingered, their phones still recording, sensing that the moment wasn't over yet. You think an apology is enough? Angela's voice cracked with anger. She gestured toward Mason, who clung to her leg, tears streaking his small face. You just traumatized my kids, humiliated my husband, and tried to drive off like nothing happened. How many other families have you done this to? Buzzcut shifted uncomfortably, his hands resting on his belt. Ma'am, we said we're sorry. There's no need to escalate this further. Marcus let out a sharp laugh, one that silenced even the murmurs of the crowd. Escalate? You assaulted me in front of my family and threw me in the back of a cruiser without cause. What you call a misunderstanding, I call a violation of civil rights. At this point, a manager from the grocery store had emerged, flanked by two employees. The store manager, a middle-aged man with a balding head and a badge that read Steve, approached cautiously. Is everything okay here? He asked, his eyes darting between Marcus and the officers. Depends on your definition of okay, Steve, Angela snapped. These officers just assaulted my husband. What do you think? Steve's face paled. Oh, I didn't know. He turned to the officers, his voice shaky. Do we need to call someone? No, Buzzcut said quickly, his tone defensive. We're handling it. Handling it? Marcus stepped forward, his voice dangerously calm. You've already mishandled this from the start. If I hadn't been an FBI agent, what would have happened next? Would I have been booked? Beaten? Worse? The word FBI rippled through the crowd. A few gasps escaped as people realized the weight of the situation. One man muttered, They messed with the wrong guy. Buzzcut looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. Sir, we didn't know. That's the problem. Marcus cut him off. You didn't care to know. You saw my skin, made an assumption and acted on it. And now you're hoping this will blow over because you picked the wrong target. Mustache, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Sir, we can file a report and make sure everything's documented. We'll cooperate fully. Marcus shook his head. Oh, you're going to file a report, all right. But not before I've spoken to your captain. Angela stepped closer to Marcus, still holding her phone. And this footage is going straight to your precinct, the local news, and whoever else needs to see it. Buzzcut raised a hand, his voice frantic now. Let's not do anything rash. We can work this out. Rash. Angela's voice was incredulous. You didn't think twice before putting your hands on my husband, but now we're the ones being rash. From the corner of the lot, a sleek black sedan pulled in, its tinted windows gleaming under the sunlight. Marcus recognized the car immediately and felt a small wave of relief. The crowd parted slightly as the vehicle came to a stop, and a man in a tailored Navy suit stepped out. It was Special Agent in Charge Timothy Harper, Marcus's direct superior, a no-nonsense leader with a reputation for handling situations with surgical precision. Harper's mere presence demanded attention. Agent Evans, Harper said, striding over with purpose. His sharp gaze fell on the two officers. What's going on here? Buzzcut opened his mouth to speak, but Marcus raised a hand. Allow me, sir, he said, his tone measured. Marcus turned back to the officers. "This is Agent Harper from the FBI. He's here to ensure this situation is resolved appropriately." Harper crossed his arms, his expression stern. "Resolved appropriately? I'd say this is already a disaster. Officers, I need your names and badge numbers, now." The officers hesitated but eventually complied, mumbling their names as Harper jotted them down in a small notebook. "What's going to happen now?" Mustache asked nervously. Harper didn't miss a beat. "What's going to happen is an internal investigation into your conduct. Your body cam footage will be reviewed. This incident will be reported to your department, and I'll personally be notifying the Department of Justice. Marcus," he added, turning to his agent, "do you want to press charges?" The question hung in the air. Angela looked at her husband, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and hope. The crowd, too, waited to see what Marcus would do. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he crouched down to Mason's level, wiping the tears from his son's face. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Daddy's okay, I promise." Mason sniffled, nodding slightly. Marcus stood and faced Harper. "For now, I'll let your office handle it. But if this gets swept under the rug," he let the unspoken threat hang in the air. "It won't," Harper said firmly. "You have my word." Buzzcut and Mustache looked visibly relieved but didn't dare say anything further. As Harper gestured for Marcus to follow him to the sedan, Angela called out, "You better believe this isn't over." She turned back to the crowd, addressing them like a natural leader. "If any of you recorded this, don't delete it. We need to hold people like this accountable." A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Marcus placed a hand on Angela's shoulder. "Let's go home," he said softly. "The kids have been through enough." Angela hesitated, then nodded, holding her children close as they walked back to the car. The Evans family returned home, but the tension from the incident at the grocery store clung to the air like a storm cloud. Marcus parked the SUV in the driveway, stepping out slowly. He could feel the weight of his children's eyes on him, their expressions mirroring the confusion and fear that lingered in his own heart. Angela unbuckled Mason and Jada, her movements sharp and purposeful. She was still fuming, her mind replaying the officer's actions and the humiliation Marcus had endured. Once inside, she sat the kids down on the couch and knelt in front of them, her voice soft but firm. "Listen to me, babies," she said. "What happened today was wrong. Those men shouldn't have treated Daddy like that, and it's not your fault. Do you understand?" Mason clung to his mother's arm. "Why were they so mean, Mommy?" Angela swallowed hard, struggling to keep her composure. "Sometimes people make bad choices because they judge others by how they look, but we're going to make sure they can't do that to anyone else." Jada, wise beyond her years, asked the question Angela had been dreading. What if they come back? What if they hurt Daddy again? Marcus, who had been listening quietly, finally stepped forward. He crouched down to their level, his expression gentle. "That's not going to happen, sweetheart," he said. "I promise you. I'm going to do everything I can to protect this family." His words seemed to soothe the children, but Angela wasn't as easily convinced. After tucking the kids into their beds for an early nap, she found Marcus sitting at the dining table, his laptop open. He was typing furiously, his jaw clenched. "Marcus," she said, crossing her arms, "I don't understand how you can be so calm about this." He looked up briefly. "I'm not calm, Angie, but I have to think strategically." Angela sat across from him, her anger still simmering. "Strategically? Those men humiliated you in front of your family. They could have killed you, Marcus. And you're sitting here filing a report like this is just another day at work." Marcus closed his laptop, meeting her gaze. "You think I don't feel the same way you do? That I didn't want to knock those men down right there in the parking lot?" His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of frustration. "But if I had done that, we wouldn't be here right now. We'd be dealing with a much worse situation." Angela leaned back, exhaling sharply. "So, what's the plan? Are you just going to let the FBI handle it and hope those officers get a slap on the wrist?" Marcus shook his head. "No, this isn't just about me, Angie. Those officers have a pattern. I could see it in how they acted. They're too comfortable, too sure that they can get away with this. I'm going to make sure they're exposed." Angela studied him for a moment, the sharp lines of her anger softening into determination. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "For now, just hold on to that footage. I've already got Harper starting the internal investigation, but this needs to go public." Angela nodded, her resolve solidifying. Then I'll call some people. There's no way we're letting this die quietly. The next day, Marcus was back in his office, poring over case files and connecting dots. He dug into the precinct's history, pulling reports of complaints filed against officers in the area. What he found didn't surprise him. Multiple accusations of excessive force, racial profiling, and misconduct, many of them dismissed without investigation. At the same time, Angela worked her own angle. She reached out to local activists and media outlets, sharing the video she had recorded. Within hours, the footage went viral, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. News stations aired clips of Marcus being shoved into the cruiser, juxtaposed with headlines about his role as an FBI agent. The story struck a nerve, not just locally but nationwide. It wasn't just about Marcus. It was a spotlight on systemic abuse and the toll it took on innocent families. Later that evening, Marcus received an email from Harper. The internal investigation was progressing faster than expected, thanks in part to Angela's video. But the email also contained a warning. The local police union was pushing back, claiming the officers had acted within their rights. Marcus felt his blood boil. This wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about a system that shielded bad actors while leaving their victims to fend for themselves. "I'm not backing down," Marcus said aloud as Angela entered the room. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting beside him. He explained the union's stance, his voice tight with controlled anger. Angela placed a hand on his. "Then we push harder," she said. "You've taken down entire criminal organizations, Marcus. These two aren't any different." Her words reignited the fire in him. Together, they crafted a plan to escalate the fight. The next morning, Marcus met with Harper at the FBI field office. Harper's expression was grim. "We've got enough to push for disciplinary action," Harper said. "But the union is making this political. They're trying to spin it as you overstepping your bounds as an agent." Marcus leaned forward. "Then let's make it political. Release the full investigation to the media. Let people see the pattern of abuse." Harper hesitated. "That's a risky move." Marcus's gaze was unwavering. "No riskier than letting this slide. You know what's at stake here." Harper sighed but nodded. "All right, I'll make the call." That night, Marcus and Angela watched as a breaking news report aired on TV. The anchor detailed the allegations against the officers, backed by both Angela's video and the newly released investigation findings. The story had gained momentum, with protests organized in front of the precinct and demands for justice growing louder. As Marcus turned off the TV, Angela leaned against him. "Do you think it'll be enough?" Marcus wrapped an arm around her, his expression thoughtful. "It's a start, but we're not done yet." 2 weeks after the viral video and the release of the FBI's investigation, the Evans family had become a focal point of a national conversation. News outlets dissected the footage, legal experts debated the systemic flaws it exposed, and social media was ablaze with hashtags demanding justice. Protests outside the Maplewood police precinct had grown daily, with activists demanding not just disciplinary action, but widespread reform. For Marcus and Angela, the past weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions. Angela had taken a leading role in addressing the media, her calm yet passionate demeanor capturing the nation's attention. Meanwhile, Marcus worked quietly behind the scenes, leveraging his connections to ensure the investigation stayed on course. But the backlash had started too. Death threats arrived in their mailbox, anonymous callers spewed hate-filled rants, and online trolls accused them of playing the race card to advance an agenda. Angela had started sleeping with a baseball bat by the bed, and Marcus's Glock was always within arm's reach. The turning point came one quiet evening, as Marcus sat at his laptop in his home office. His screen was filled with files, case reports, incident logs, and witness statements from other victims of the Maplewood police. He'd been building a comprehensive profile on Buzzcut and Mustache, whose real names he now knew, Officer David Klein and Sergeant Rick Mathers. Both had a troubling history of complaints, most of which had been quietly dismissed by internal reviews. A soft knock on the door broke his concentration. Angela entered, holding her phone. "Marcus," she said, her voice tense, "you need to see this." She handed him the phone. On the screen was a message from a blocked number, accompanied by a grainy photo of their children walking home from school earlier that day. The caption read, "Keep pushing, and your family pays the price." Marcus felt a cold wave wash over him. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Where are the kids?" "They're in their rooms," Angela said quickly. "I didn't want to scare them." Marcus immediately went to check on them. Mason was playing with his toys, oblivious, while Jada was reading a book. Both were safe, but the sight of them filled him with equal parts relief and fury. Returning to Angela, Marcus's voice was low and steady. "This changes everything. They've crossed a line." Angela nodded, her jaw set. "So, what do we do now?" The next morning, Marcus met Harper at the FBI field office. As soon as Marcus entered Harper's office, he placed the phone with the threatening message on the desk. "They're targeting my family," Marcus said, his voice taut with anger. "This isn't just about those two officers anymore. This is an organized cover-up." Harper's expression darkened. "This is serious. I'll get our cyber team on it immediately to trace the sender." "That's not enough," Marcus said. "We need to escalate this. I want DOJ involved. If these guys are willing to go after my family, they'll do it to someone else. We need to dismantle this entire network." Harper leaned back in his chair, considering the request. "Marcus, involving DOJ could turn this into a political firestorm. Are you ready for that?" Marcus's eyes narrowed. "They've already made it personal. I'm not backing down." Back home, Marcus briefed Angela on the next steps. Angela, who had been coordinating with local activists, had news of her own. "I spoke to one of the other victims," she said. "A young man named Terrence. He had a similar run-in with those same officers last year. They accused him of shoplifting, beat him up in an alley, and let him go without charges. He filed a complaint, but it disappeared." Marcus nodded. "I'll add his story to the case file. The more patterns we can establish, the harder it'll be for them to explain this away." Angela hesitated. "There's something else. Terrence is willing to speak out, but he's scared. He's seen what's happening to us." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tell him we'll protect him. The FBI will ensure his safety." A week later, Marcus sat in a federal courtroom as Harper and DOJ officials presented their findings to a grand jury. The investigation had uncovered a damning pattern of abuse and corruption within the Maplewood Police Department. Officers like Klein and Mathers operated with near-total impunity, shielded by a network of supervisors and union officials who buried complaints and silenced whistleblowers. Angela sat beside him, clutching his hand tightly as the prosecutor outlined the charges. Klein and Mathers were indicted on multiple counts, including civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. Their union representative attempted to downplay the charges as politically motivated, but the evidence was overwhelming. Outside the courthouse, Angela spoke to reporters, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "This isn't just about my family," she said. "This is about every family who has been targeted, harassed, and silenced. It's about holding people accountable and ensuring this never happens again." That night, as the family sat down for dinner, there was a knock at the door. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his holstered Glock. Angela opened the door cautiously to find Terrence standing there, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice trembling, "for fighting back, for giving people like me a chance to be heard." Angela smiled and invited him in. As he sat with the family, Mason asked him innocently, "Did those bad men hurt you too?" Terrence nodded, his voice soft. "They did, but thanks to your mom and dad, they won't hurt anyone else." By the time the evening ended, Marcus felt a small but significant shift in his perspective. The fight wasn't over. There were still layers of corruption to dismantle, more victims to support. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Ready for round two?" Angela asked as they cleaned up the kitchen. Marcus smiled. "Always." The Evans family's fight for justice sent ripples through the community and beyond. News of the indictments against officers Klein and Mathers dominated headlines, sparking national debates about accountability in law enforcement. The Maplewood Police Department faced mounting pressure, not only from federal investigators, but also from an increasingly vocal public. For Marcus and Angela, the victory in court was just the beginning. With the systemic issues exposed, more victims came forward. Marcus spent countless hours compiling evidence from complaints, corroborating stories, and working closely with DOJ officials to ensure no stone was left unturned. At home, Angela handled the media with grace and determination. She had become the face of the fight, fielding interviews and rallying support from activists and community leaders. Yet the backlash persisted. The threats continued, some subtle, others overt. A brick was thrown through their front window late one night, landing on the living room floor with a scrawled note, "Drop it or else." Angela stood in the shards of broken glass, her jaw clenched. Marcus entered the room moments later, his weapon drawn, scanning for any immediate danger. "This has to stop," Angela said, her voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath. "It will," Marcus replied, his eyes hard. "But we're not stopping first." At the precinct, tensions were boiling over. Inside the break room, officers debated the fallout. Some sided with Klein and Mathers, calling the Evans family opportunists who were exploiting the situation. Others, particularly younger recruits, were more cautious, seeing the writing on the wall. One officer, Detective Maria Vasquez, had been quietly observing from the sidelines. She had seen enough in her years on the force to know that the corruption ran deep. Marcus's case gave her the push she needed to act. Later that day, Vasquez slipped a plain manila envelope into the DOJ's tip line. Inside were copies of internal emails, whistleblower statements, and incriminating documentation showing how complaints against officers were routinely buried. When the DOJ reviewed the new evidence, they realized the rot was far more pervasive than they had suspected. The department's leadership had orchestrated cover-ups for years, silencing complaints and rewarding officers like Klein and Mathers with promotions. As the DOJ investigation expanded, protests outside the precinct swelled. Angela became a regular speaker, her voice a rallying cry for change. Marcus often stood at the edge of the crowd, quietly observing, his FBI instincts always on high alert. One evening, as Angela finished speaking to a cheering crowd, a young woman approached her. "Mrs. Evans," the woman said, her voice shaking. "My brother was one of their victims. They beat him so badly he had to move out of town. He didn't think anyone would believe him." Angela placed a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. "They will now. Tell him to come forward. Every story adds to the fight." The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. At home, the family settled into a new rhythm. Jada and Mason were slowly recovering from the trauma, though they still asked questions that broke Marcus's heart. One night, as he tucked Mason into bed, the boy looked up at him with wide, solemn eyes. "Daddy," Mason said, "are the bad men going to come back?" Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, his hand gently brushing Mason's hair. "No, buddy," he said firmly. "Daddy's going to make sure they never hurt anyone again." "But what if they do?" Mason whispered. Marcus leaned closer, his voice soft but resolute. "Then I'll be ready for them." The mounting evidence against the Maplewood Police Department culminated in a bombshell. A high-ranking lieutenant, hoping to save himself, flipped on his colleagues. His testimony revealed a web of corruption, implicating not only officers but also union leaders and even members of the city council. The revelations sent shockwaves through the community. The police chief was forced to resign, several officers were suspended, and a federal oversight committee was appointed to oversee the department's operations. For Marcus, the victory felt bittersweet. Justice was being served, but he knew it wouldn't erase the fear his children had experienced or the sleepless nights Angela had endured. One evening, as Marcus reviewed case files in his office, Angela appeared in the doorway. "You've been at this all day," she said. "Come take a break." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "There's still so much to do. Every time I think we're making progress, another layer gets uncovered." Angela walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not doing this alone, Marcus. Look at what we've already accomplished. People are listening. They're taking action. That's because of you." Marcus looked up at her, his expression softening. "It's because of us. You've been the voice of this fight, Angie. Without you, none of this would have gained traction." Angela smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Well, good, because I'm not stopping anytime soon." The media frenzy slowly began to die down as the legal process took over. Klein and Mathers were convicted of civil rights violations, sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Several other officers resigned under pressure or were fired outright. The DOJ report led to sweeping reforms, including mandatory bias training, increased oversight, and a new civilian review board. For Marcus and Angela, the fight had been grueling, but it had also brought them closer together. They had faced threats, hate, and doubt. But they had emerged stronger, their bond unshakable. One night, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Angela turned to Marcus. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked quietly. Marcus watched Mason chase Jada around the lawn, their laughter filling the air. He thought of the victims who had come forward, the officers who had been held accountable, and the changes that were beginning to take root. "For now," he said, "it's enough." Angela nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "But we're not done, are we?" Marcus smiled. "Not even close." In the months that followed the convictions of Officers Klein and Mathers, the Evans family found themselves adjusting to a new normal. While the media frenzy around their case had quieted, the changes they had set into motion continued to ripple outward. The Maplewood Police Department had been placed under federal oversight, and the first civilian review board in the town's history was established. Yet for Marcus and Angela, the journey of overcoming wasn't just about systemic change. It was about healing their family. At home, the small scars from the ordeal were still visible. Mason no longer wanted to ride his bike alone down their quiet suburban street. Jada had become unusually quiet at school, her once bubbly personality tempered by worry. Marcus and Angela knew their children needed time to feel safe again, and they were determined to create an environment where healing could happen. One Saturday morning, Marcus called the family into the living room. Angela noticed the mischievous glint in his eye as he stood in front of the TV, holding a stack of printed maps and markers. "What's going on?" Angela asked, crossing her arms with a skeptical smile. "We're going on an adventure," Marcus announced. "Pack your bags, we're hitting the road." Jada's eyes lit up. "A road trip?" "That's right," Marcus said, "just the four of us. No work, no protests, no cameras, just us." Angela raised an eyebrow. "You sure you can take that much time off, Mr. FBI agent?" Marcus grinned. "I cleared it with Harper. He said even superheroes need a vacation." Angela rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "All right, but I'm not the one packing the snacks." The next 2 weeks took the family on a whirlwind journey. From the beaches of Florida to the Great Smoky Mountains, Marcus and Angela made it their mission to reconnect with their children. Mason and Jada slowly began to relax, their laughter returning as they hiked trails, built sandcastles, and roasted marshmallows under the stars. One evening, while camping in the mountains, the family gathered around the fire. Mason stared into the flames, his expression thoughtful. "Dad," he said quietly, "are there bad guys everywhere?" The question hung in the air. Marcus glanced at Angela before leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "There are bad guys in the world," Marcus admitted. "But there are a lot more good people. People who care about doing the right thing. People like Mom and me, and people like you and Jada." Mason looked up at him, his small face serious. "But what if the bad guys come back?" Marcus reached out and tousled Mason's hair. "Then we do what we always do. We stand up for what's right and we take care of each other." Jada, who had been quiet, spoke up. "Like you and Mom did with the police?" "Exactly," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We don't let fear stop us from doing the right thing, and we never let anyone make us feel small." Angela reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "That's right," she said. "We stand together." When they returned home, the family felt different, closer, more resilient. Mason and Jada began opening up about their fears, and Marcus and Angela found new ways to reassure them, from open conversations to family game nights that turned into hours of uncontrollable laughter. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. Harper assigned him to lead a new task force focusing on systemic corruption in law enforcement. Though it was a daunting task, Marcus embraced it, knowing firsthand what was at stake. Angela, too, continued her activism, but she had learned to set boundaries. She partnered with local organizations to create community programs, offering resources to families who had experienced similar traumas. Her ability to balance fierce advocacy with compassion made her a respected figure in Maplewood and beyond. One day, as she walked through a local park with Mason and Jada, a woman approached her hesitantly. "Mrs. Evans?" the woman asked. Angela smiled. "Yes." The woman, holding the hand of a young boy, took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say thank you. My son and I, we went through something like what your family did. Watching you speak out gave me the courage to file a complaint. And now the officer who hurt my son is finally being held accountable." Angela's eyes softened. "I'm so glad you came forward. It's not easy, but it's worth it. If you ever need anything, you can always reach out to us." The woman nodded, her gratitude evident. "You've given us hope. Thank you." As they parted ways, Mason looked up at Angela. "Mom, are we superheroes?" Angela laughed, crouching down to his level. "No, baby, but sometimes standing up for what's right feels like a superpower, doesn't it?" Mason grinned, nodding enthusiastically. Months later, the Evans family attended a community event celebrating the changes in Maplewood. The atmosphere was vibrant, filled with music, food trucks, and families enjoying the newfound sense of unity. Marcus and Angela watched as Mason and Jada played with other children, their laughter ringing out across the park. A local journalist approached Marcus, notebook in hand. "Agent Evans, do you think the reforms in Maplewood are enough?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "I think they're a good start, but real change doesn't happen overnight. It takes persistence and people willing to hold others accountable. My family's story is just one piece of a much larger fight." The journalist scribbled notes before asking, "And what keeps you motivated?" Marcus glanced at Angela and their kids, a soft smile spreading across his face. "My family," he said simply. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a warm golden light, Marcus and Angela stood side by side, watching their children run freely. For the first time in months, the weight on their shoulders felt lighter. They had overcome so much. And though the fight wasn't over, they knew they would face whatever came next, together. Months after the convictions and reforms, life for the Evans family seemed to have settled into a peaceful rhythm. Angela's work with local organizations grew into a larger platform, and Marcus's leadership in the FBI task force gained recognition. They were regaining a sense of normalcy, but they both knew the fight wasn't over. Despite the victories, there were whispers in Maplewood, grumblings from those who opposed the changes. A faction within the local police force, emboldened by union support, had begun pushing back. Anonymous messages circulated online, accusing Marcus and Angela of being opportunists. Protests against the reforms began to spring up, organized by those who felt the changes were anti-police. Marcus wasn't surprised. "The system doesn't change without resistance," he told Angela one night as they sat in the kitchen, discussing the latest developments. "They're scared because they know their power is slipping." Angela nodded, but her eyes were weary. "I just worry about the kids. All this attention, it feels like we're still in the spotlight." Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. "We're doing this for them, for all the kids who deserve a better world." Angela smiled faintly, but the unease lingered. The next day, Marcus attended a meeting at the FBI field office. Harper greeted him with a grim expression, handing him a thin file. "We've uncovered something concerning," Harper said, closing the office door behind them. Marcus opened the file, his eyes scanning the pages. It contained a series of emails and phone records tying members of the Maplewood Police Department to a far-right group known for targeting activists and public figures. The group had been under investigation for months, but the discovery of their connection to local law enforcement raised the stakes. "This isn't just about Maplewood anymore," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "If this group has infiltrated the police, they could be anywhere." Harper nodded. "That's what we're afraid of, and there's more." He handed Marcus a printed image of a surveillance photo, a man in tactical gear standing outside a suburban home. Marcus's heart sank as he recognized his own house. "When was this taken?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp. 3 nights ago, Harper said. "We believe it's meant as intimidation." Marcus's hands curled into fists. "They're escalating." Harper placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "We're assigning protection to your family, but you need to be vigilant. These people are dangerous." That evening, Marcus sat Angela down and told her everything. Her face hardened as she listened, her anger growing with each word. "They came to our house," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "They're threatening our kids again?" Marcus nodded. "The FBI is assigning agents to keep watch, but we need to stay alert. I'll be working directly with the task force to root them out." Angela crossed her arms, her resolve evident. "I want to help. If they think they can scare us into silence, they're wrong." "Angie." "No, Marcus," she interrupted. "This isn't just your fight. It's ours. I'll increase security at the community center and work with the other activists. We're not backing down." Marcus knew better than to argue. Angela's determination was unshakable, and it was one of the reasons he loved her. The next week was tense. Plainclothes FBI agents monitored the Evans home around the clock, and Marcus doubled down on his work with the task force. They uncovered more links between the extremist group and rogue officers, leading to several arrests. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the situation became. Angela, meanwhile, threw herself into organizing a community rally to support victims of police misconduct. She knew the event would draw attention, both positive and negative, but she was determined to push forward. The day of the rally arrived, and the Evans family arrived at the park early. The atmosphere was electric, with hundreds of people gathering to hear speeches, share stories, and demand justice. Angela took the stage, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about one family," she said. "It's about all of us, about standing up to fear, to intimidation, and to injustice. We've come too far to turn back now." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy palpable. But as Angela stepped off the stage, Marcus noticed something that made his instincts flare. A man in the back of the crowd, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, was lingering near one of the exits. His stance was stiff, his movements too deliberate. Marcus subtly signaled to one of the undercover FBI agents in the crowd. "Back corner," he murmured into his radio. "Check the guy in the hat." The agent moved swiftly, but as he approached, the man darted toward the parking lot. Marcus was already moving, weaving through the crowd with practiced precision. "Angela, stay with the kids," he shouted over his shoulder. Marcus caught up with the man in the parking lot. "FBI, stop right there," he commanded, drawing his badge. The man turned, his face pale but defiant. "You don't know what you're messing with," he spat. Marcus stepped closer, his voice icy. "I know exactly what I'm messing with, and I know you're not acting alone." The man smirked, his confidence unsettling. "You think this ends with me? You've made a lot of enemies, Agent Evans. You can't protect everyone." Before Marcus could respond, 2 more agents arrived, securing the man in handcuffs. Back at the rally, Angela's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Suspect in custody. Stay alert. I'll explain everything later." She exhaled sharply, her heart pounding. Looking out at the crowd, she steeled herself. They had faced threats before, and they would again. But she refused to let fear win. That night, as the family sat together in their living room, Marcus shared the details of the arrest with Angela. The man had been part of the extremist group, sent to scout the rally for vulnerabilities. "They're desperate," Marcus said. "Their network is crumbling and they're lashing out. But we're closing in." Angela placed a hand on his. "And when they're gone, we'll be here, stronger than ever." Marcus nodded, his determination renewed. Together, the arrest at the rally marked a tipping point. Marcus and his FBI task force intensified their efforts, using the captured suspect's information to unravel the extremist group's plans. They uncovered encrypted communications, revealing that the group was planning a coordinated attack on a major event, a public meeting at the Maplewood Civic Center, where community leaders, activists, and law enforcement officials were set to discuss police reforms. The timing couldn't have been worse. Marcus knew the civic meeting was critical for maintaining momentum behind the reforms, but the threat meant everyone involved was now a target. The FBI recommended canceling the event, but Angela and the other organizers refused to back down. "We can't let them win," Angela said firmly as she and Marcus sat at the kitchen table late one night. "If we cancel, we're sending a message that fear works, that they can silence us." Marcus frowned, his protective instincts warring with his respect for Angela's courage. "I get that, Angie, but if they're planning an attack, I can't guarantee everyone's safety." Angela reached across the table, her eyes locking onto his. "You've trained for this, Marcus. You know how to stop them, and I trust you. So do the people counting on this meeting." Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. He knew she was right. "All right," he said, "but we're going to do this my way." Over the next few days, Marcus coordinated a full-scale security operation. The FBI quietly increased their presence around Maplewood, deploying undercover agents to monitor potential threats. A specialized tactical team was stationed nearby, ready to respond at a moment's notice. Marcus worked tirelessly, reviewing every detail of the plan, ensuring there were no gaps. Angela, meanwhile, focused on rallying the community. She and the other organizers held smaller meetings to reassure attendees that the event would proceed safely. Her words carried weight, her determination inspiring those around her. On the day of the meeting, the Civic Center buzzed with activity. Hundreds of people filled the auditorium, a mix of activists, community members, and local officials. Security was tight, with FBI agents stationed discreetly throughout the venue. Angela stood near the stage speaking with other organizers while Marcus surveyed the room from the back, his earpiece crackling with updates from his team. "Anything suspicious?" Marcus asked quietly. "Negative so far," came the reply. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and they were screaming at him now. As the meeting began, the tension in the air was palpable. Angela was one of the first speakers, her voice steady as she addressed the audience. "We're here today to continue what we started," she said, "to build a community where justice isn't just a promise, but a reality, and we won't be intimidated. We won't back down." Her words drew applause, but Marcus's attention was elsewhere. His eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on a man near the exit who seemed unusually fidgety. The man's hands were tucked into his jacket, and he kept glancing toward the stage. "Team, eyes on the west exit," Marcus murmured into his mic. "Possible suspect male, mid-30s, black jacket." Two agents moved discreetly toward the man, their movements blending into the crowd. Marcus shifted his position, ready to intervene if necessary. Suddenly, the man bolted. "West exit! Suspect is fleeing!" Marcus shouted, pushing through the crowd. The man shoved past attendees, knocking over chairs as he sprinted toward the door. Marcus was on his heels, adrenaline pumping. The suspect burst through the exit and into the parking lot, where he was met by two waiting agents. Cornered, the man pulled something from his jacket, a small device with blinking lights. "Bomb!" one of the agents shouted. Marcus drew his weapon, his voice ringing with authority. "Drop it now!" The suspect hesitated, his eyes darting between Marcus and the agents. "This is over," Marcus said firmly. "You don't want to die for this. Drop it." The man's hand wavered, and for a moment, it seemed like he might comply. But then he lunged toward a nearby car, the device still in his grip. Marcus didn't hesitate. He fired, the shot echoing through the lot. The suspect collapsed, the device clattering to the ground. "Device secure," one of the agents reported, moving quickly to examine it. "It's live, but the timer's stopped. We need the bomb squad." Inside the Civic Center, the commotion had caused a stir. Angela rushed toward the back of the room, her heart racing. She spotted Marcus re-entering the building, his expression grim but composed. "Marcus," she called out, running to him. "What happened?" "The situation's under control," he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They won't hurt anyone tonight." Angela exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. Thank God. In the aftermath, news of the foiled attack spread quickly. The FBI arrested several more members of the extremist group, based on intel gathered from the suspect. The bomb, it turned out, had been intended to detonate near the stage, a direct threat to Angela and the other speakers. The Evans family became national heroes once again, their courage and resilience inspiring countless others. But for Marcus and Angela, the real victory was more personal. They had faced their greatest challenge yet and emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. As they sat together that night, watching their children sleep, Angela leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder. "You saved us again," she said softly. "We saved each other," Marcus replied. Angela smiled. "So, what's next?" Marcus chuckled. "Hopefully a little peace and quiet." But they both knew that, whatever came next, they were ready. The weeks following the attempted bombing brought a mixture of relief and resolve for the Evans family. Marcus's actions during the Civic Center incident had solidified his reputation as a hero in the eyes of many. But for him, it wasn't about recognition. It was about ensuring that his family, and families like theirs, could live without fear. Angela became even more determined to use her platform to enact lasting change. She worked tirelessly with community leaders to create initiatives aimed at bridging the divide between law enforcement and the people they served. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his work with the FBI task force, methodically dismantling the extremist group that had threatened their community. Though their days were filled with work and responsibilities, they made time for each other. Family dinners became sacred, a chance to reconnect and heal from the chaos of the past months. Mason and Jada began to thrive again, their laughter returning to fill the house. One evening, as they gathered for dinner, Jada brought up a question that had been on her mind. "Mom, Dad," she said, "why do bad people do bad things?" Angela set down her fork, exchanging a glance with Marcus. "It's not always easy to explain, sweetheart," Angela said. "Sometimes people hurt others because they're scared or angry. Sometimes they're just taught the wrong things." Marcus nodded, his voice gentle. "But what's important is that there are more good people in the world than bad ones. And when good people stand together, they can make things better." Jada seemed to mull this over, then smiled. "Like you and Mom?" "Exactly," Marcus said, smiling back. Mason, who had been listening quietly, chimed in. "Does that mean we're superheroes?" Angela laughed, leaning over to ruffle his hair. "Maybe not superheroes, but we're a pretty strong team." As time passed, the reforms in Maplewood began to take root. The police department underwent significant changes, with new leadership focused on transparency and accountability. The Civilian Review Board became a model for neighboring communities, inspiring similar movements across the state. The Evans family continued to advocate for justice, but they also found moments of peace. They took family vacations, celebrated milestones, and created new traditions that brought them closer together. One day, Marcus received a letter from a young man named Terrence, the same man who had initially hesitated to come forward with his story. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Evans, I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. Because of your courage, I was able to speak out, and my life has changed for the better. I've started college and I'm studying criminal justice. I want to make a difference, just like you have. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to stand up and fight for what's right." Marcus folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer, his chest swelling with quiet pride. Moments like these reminded him why they had fought so hard. One night, as Marcus and Angela sat on the porch, watching the stars, Angela broke the comfortable silence. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked softly. Marcus thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not enough, but enough for now." Angela smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You know, I never imagined our lives would take this turn, but I'm proud of what we've done and I'm proud of us." Marcus wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Me too, and whatever comes next, we'll handle it, together." As they sat in the quiet of the night, their children asleep inside and the world outside beginning to change, they felt a profound sense of peace. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but they had stood firm, they had fought back, and they had won. 6 months later, the Evans family attended a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly renamed Evans Community Justice Center in Maplewood. The center would serve as a hub for legal aid, community outreach, and police accountability efforts. As Marcus and Angela stood together, Mason and Jada by their sides, the mayor handed Angela the oversized ceremonial scissors. "This wouldn't be possible without your family's courage," the mayor said. Angela cut the ribbon, the crowd erupting in applause. Later, as they drove home, Mason asked, "What's next, Mom?" Angela smiled at Marcus. "Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." The story of the Evans family shows how courage and determination can spark meaningful change. Their fight reminds us all that standing together against injustice is a powerful force. If this story inspired you, let's keep the conversation going. Follow our page to stay connected and learn more about stories of resilience and change. Share this story with your friends, family, and community, because every voice matters, and your support can make a difference. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and build a brighter, fairer future. Let's make sure this story reaches everyone who needs to hear it.